Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this opportunity to engage with our panelists on the everyday challenges of being a parent in a non-legal state. It's my pleasure to introduce our participant who will be available to answer your questions following this discussion. Our panelist is Lelah Jerger. For more information about our participant, please refer to the speaker bibliography in the center of your screen. My name is Dr. Kent Crowley, and I will be the moderator for this discussion. This session is interactive, so please submit your questions by clicking on the Ask a Question box located on the far left of your screen and type your questions into the drop-down box. We will address your questions via email following the discussion. Lelah Jerger is the wife and mother of 5 children. When her daughter, Jaelah, was diagnosed with epilepsy, Lelah became active in Indiana politics to legalize cannabis therapies. Because of the involvement of Child Protective Services for using cannabis therapies, she had to move her family to Colorado to be safe. Jaelah is currently using cannabis therapies for epilepsy. Lelah is a volunteer for the Realm of Caring and is still actively involved in cannabis legislation. So I'd like to introduce Lelah now. Can you just tell us your story of what led you to consider cannabis as a treatment option for your daughter?
When Jaelah was first diagnosed with epilepsy, we had the discussion over the phone with her neurologist about the different pharmaceuticals that we could have chose for Jaelah. And I just remember, it's been over a year, but I remember the phone call and I remember her going into the discussion about the diagnosis. And then for the next 5 minutes, we discussed pharmaceuticals and the different side effects and what it could do to her. And, you know, infertility was one of the side effects, and kidney stones and Keppra range. And we just thought, you know, there's got to be something better out there. There's got to be something safer that's going to do the same thing. And that's when my husband supports cannabis use, and he brought it up to me. And at first I was not okay with it, but after my own research and talking to other parents and people in similar situations like ours, it seemed like the best choice to go to, the safest option for her.
Did you use people in your local area to ask those questions, or were you reaching out to other parents around the country?
A lot of it was in-state discussion. I met 2 wonderful mothers who had already fought for legislation in Indiana, and they were great with information on what we can do. I obviously talked with the makers of what product we used, and got into contact with other families that were using it via that. It wasn't just Indiana people, it was Florida and different states that we had talked to.
As a mother of 5, what were the concerns besides dealing with the legality of cannabis administration to one of your children with the other kids?
The other kids, they obviously played a big role in the decision that we were going to make. We had no idea that we would run into the legal issues that we ran into. I bought the oil that we were using from a doctor in Indiana. So I didn't see anything wrong with the legalities of it when we first started or on it. The kids themselves, they just wanted the seizures to stop. We all just wanted the seizures to stop, no matter what it took.
realizing that our audience and myself are already having a zillion questions surrounding the prescriber having access to the oil, can you shed a little light on that scenario?
It was we went to a functional wellness center in the southern part of Indiana. He is a chiropractic neurologist, is what title he went by. It was a functionist wellness center with a great reputation, and the doctor himself had a great reputation. And he is the one that he looked at Jaelah's EEG. He had all of the information that he needed to make a decision and to make a recommendation. And that's what his recommendation was the oil and then a couple of other supplements that she would be taking.
That's remarkable, because that licensed healthcare provider in that state was really bucking the system. Was he? At
the time, let's be clear, that was at the time, yes, he completely bucked the system and was on our side. Now, once Child Protective Services got involved, he kind of rescinded a little bit and was like, oh, I would never tell them not to take the pharmaceuticals. And yeah, I sold him the oil, but there was a lot of, he had a different story once it came to talking to CPS.
How did that impact moving forward once you had the material, once you started treating your daughter? Maybe we should start with describe how you incorporated that into Jaelah's routine. How old was she at the point in time that she started cannabis? What grade was she in? Kind of give us a little bit of that background, how you integrated it into her lifestyle.
It was really easy to integrate it. Jaelah was 17 months old when we got the diagnosis. She was 18 months old when we started the cannabis therapies. We found, I guess we got lucky, and she likes the flavor of it, and she doesn't have any issues taking it at all. So introducing it into her morning routine was pretty simple, and doing it at nighttime was pretty simple. She's a pretty easygoing kid. And the product that we use, thankfully, she likes the taste of it. So
there wasn't school involved. Some of those challenges, you could control it in the house. What initiated Child Protective Services? How did that start?
So Jaelah got the diagnosis in July of 2017. And when we got the diagnosis, we were going to a renowned children's hospital up in Indiana. They didn't approve of it. They wanted her on a pharmaceutical, obviously. We told them that we wanted to try this. Let's see how it goes. If she has a grand mal seizure, then we will look into your options. But for now, this is working. It's working. We were seeing the change in Jaelah. We were seeing the improvements cognitively and the decrease in seizures. So we didn't see any point in adding another regimen when we were already getting such great control. So it turned out that we wanted to get a second opinion because we had learned about this doctor in Louisville, Kentucky, that supported the use of what we were using, that supported the use of cannabis. So we reached out to them and we got the second opinion. And at that point, my husband and I knew we had to decide, are we going to stick with this doctor in Louisville, Kentucky, or are we going to go back to the Children's Hospital in Indiana? And I called up to Riley's Hospital and asked them if they would be willing to do a 24-hour video EEG for Jaelah, because we wanted to see that it was working. So we requested ourselves the video EEG, And I got off the phone with a nurse and she said, yeah, we'll do it. No problem at all. And I said, okay, if you guys are going to do it and you guys are going to support our use, then I guess we're going to stick with you guys up in Indiana. And that was around noon on September 23rd. At 4 o'clock on September 23rd, I got the phone call from the nurse, the social worker at the hospital in Indiana, saying that we were reported to Child Protective Services because of our refusal to use pharmaceuticals.
So what happened then?
Child Protective Services came the next day to our house. They showed up at 9 o'clock in the morning. My husband was at work. It was just me and my daughter. I called my husband. He came home from work real quick. We let him in. We didn't think we were doing anything wrong. If not letting them in would have probably caused more problems than good. When they came in, we talked to the caseworker. By then, Jaelah was actually on a very, very low dose of Keppra. We had put her on it as a second recommendation from the doctor in Louisville. He had suggested that we put her on Keppra just at a low dose to kind of help and get her completely seizure-free because she was still having maybe 10 myoclonics a day. So the low dose of Keppra was supposed to just kind of knock them all out. And ended up not. That was not the case. We had an increase in seizures on Keppra. We had Keppra rage. Jaelah would walk around the house and just cry for absolutely no reason, just cry, walking around the house. We didn't know what was wrong with her. We didn't know how to fix it. She wasn't sleeping. It was horrible. So we actually wanted her off the Keppra, and we had already been in contact with our doctor to make it happen. And when Child Protective Services showed up, we had already, started weaning her back down and everything else. The caseworker came in and she asked about Jaelah's situation. She asked about her condition. She asked about the medicine that she's on. I showed her the bottle of Keppra. I showed her this. The medicine was gone. She had been using it, obviously. And she listened to it. I asked her, I said, do you know anything about epilepsy? Or do you know anything about this treatment that we're using? And she looked me straight in the eyes and she said, I have no clue about any of it. I said, well, have you spoken to any of the doctors yet? And she said, no, I haven't, because we haven't gotten a hold of the doctors yet. Okay, so you're here simply on a voicemail that the nurse had left for the caseworker. And she said, yes. And I said, okay. So I kind of gave her a dummy session on epilepsy and cannabis therapies and everything like that. And she said, okay, let me go staff with my supervisor. And she did. She came back in 30 minutes later after sitting in our driveway on the phone and came back in with this little Post-it of what we are supposed to do in order to keep our daughter. And one of the stipulations was that we had to keep her on the Keppra. We were not allowed to take her off the Keppra. Number two was we could only see one doctor, and that was the doctor that they chose. And number three was that we would take our daughter to get weekly lab draws to prove to them that we were giving her the Keppra. And if we didn't do any of those, they would take her and all of our children.
So that had to be heartbreaking, frustrating, realizing that you had already seen a failure of therapy, a worsening of the condition. Someone that wasn't a healthcare provider was requiring you to do something that wasn't helpful and probably harmful for your daughter, with no skill set in even making those decisions, medical decisions for you and your daughter. So what did you do next?
We refused to sign the paper, refused to sign it and got a lawyer. And actually, I'm going to be straightforward. I hate politics. I hate it. It's a game that I did not want to play. And we reached out to a senator that is close to us. We actually thought he was our senator, but it turns out he was not. We are not in his district. He went to bat for us. He came to our home. He met us. He met Jaelah. He is completely in support of the therapies that we were using. He's like, this is why we passed the law to allow epileptics to use it. And, just because Jaelah's condition was not the epileptic condition that they wanted, that doesn't mean that it wasn't working. That doesn't mean that it wasn't helping. He went to bat for us. He put his name on the line, and he called the governor's office himself. He called the director of Child Protective Services. I don't know what he said. I don't know what he did, but he was able to get our case closed within 2 weeks. And we had to take Jaelah to get one lab draw to prove that she was on the Keppra. And then they ended up closing our child protective case because of the senator who went to bat for us and stood up for us.
That's just an amazing story. So I guess the next step would be, what forced you to have to move to Colorado?
After our initial case, we did file a lawsuit against the state of Indiana for violating our rights. One of the rights is the Fourth Amendment right. When they drew Jaelah's blood without a court order, they had no right to make us do that. But we were absolutely cornered. If we did not take Jaelah to get that lab draw that day, they would have gotten a court order and they would have taken all of our kids. They made that very clear to us. So we had to take her for at least one lab draw. After that, our attorney was like, okay, the case is closed. Now what do you guys want to do? And they can't do this to families. They can't put other families through what they put us through, not having any idea. They have no medical experience at all. How can they make recommendations on how we treat our child or what we do for her? That should be between us and her doctor. And our lawyer suggested the lawsuit against the state of Indiana. And we're like, you know what? If it'll make a difference, if it'll change how they treat one family, then we're going to do it. So we filed the lawsuit against the state of Indiana. And within the year, the case happened in September. We left in June. We had Child Protective Services at our house for 6 other times. And it was not for the cannabis use. It turned out it was any excuse. They showed up one day at our house at 7:00 in the morning with police officers because they suspected that I was abusing my husband and that we were doing other illegal drugs. So, I mean, I don't know if...
Without any evidence
whatsoever. Any evidence whatsoever. It was we were using illegal drugs, or we were abusing the kids, or we didn't have enough food in the house, or... I mean, it was just one excuse after another for them to come to our house. It was one excuse after another. We came to Colorado in May to meet the Stanley family for a vacation. While we were here, we discussed moving to Colorado and to be able to try different therapies, because we knew we couldn't give our daughter straight THC in Indiana because it was illegal. We couldn't go to jail for that. So we knew it was illegal to give her other cannabinoids specifically. So we knew that if we wanted to treat Jaelah and we wanted to be safe, that we were going to have to make a move. So we decided when we got back home that we were going to go. We set the date for June 16th. We visited them in May. In June, we decided we were moving. So June 16th was the day that we were supposed to leave. On June 15th, while everyone was at our house helping us pack up and get ready to go and load the U-Haul, I received a phone call from Child Protective Services again, saying that they were coming. They needed to speak to us. They had new allegations. I got my kids in the car and we left that night. We didn't get to say goodbye to anyone. We didn't get anything. We got in our car and we left that day before meeting with them for the last time.
That's just amazing. It's painful to hear this story and to listen to the abuse that these agencies inflict where they don't have any responsibility, but they've been given the power to be able to engage in a way that is not the intention of that entity. It's to protect, not to harm.
Exactly.
I guess let's hear what you did once you got to Colorado. I'd like to know where the lawsuit went and if there was any modification to focus on CMS's, broad reach that seems like it's almost criminal in nature as far as harming, your daughter and your family, and talk a little bit about the formulation that you used in Indiana and ultimately what you arrived at once you got to Colorado.
The lawsuit is still pending. I don't remember off the top of my head what the exact amount was that we were suing for the violation. We offered them a settlement back in December for $50,000 and they refused it. So it's ongoing. The case has not been closed yet. We're still waiting to hear from a judge as to whether or not he's even going to hear the case. And at the time, if he does decide to, then I will be traveling back to Indiana by myself to represent Jaelah in the case and see where it goes. Hopefully it does, because like I said, if it makes a difference for one family and that agency realizing that they can't do this to families, they have no idea the trauma and what that experience has done to either one of my children. I've had to hold my 11-year-old while she just broke down and cried, thinking that they were going to take her away. They have no idea. So if they can just know what they've done, maybe it'll make a difference for the next family. We don't know. So the case is still pending and we'll just see where it goes from there. In Indiana, we were using Charlotte's Web, and we continue to use Charlotte's Web here in Colorado. We did have to leave one of our children behind in Indiana. One of them is still there. And that part of it's hard. It's hard for my husband and it's hard for my other kids. But now that we're here in Colorado, we are able to discuss it. I mean, our doctors still can't say, oh, you need this, 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 and this, or they can't prescribe it. They can't tell us what to do. But they can support us. They can kind of off the chart guide us. But mostly it's the different families that we talk to and the moms that are and the dads that are in the same boat that we are, that may have the same diagnosis of Deuce syndrome. They may have a different diagnosis of epilepsy, but they know they've been here a lot longer than us. They have a lot more experience hands-on than we do. So it's just kind of trying to find what works for Jaelah and what doesn't. Cognitively, Jaelah is doing amazing here. She has went from a vocabulary of a 12-month-old to a 3-year-old since September of last year. So cognitively, she's leaping and bounding with the therapies the cannabis therapies we're able to use here. The seizure reduction is still at a 90%. No, we're not at 100% yet. We know that we have more to try. We're not done trying different cannabis therapies and seeing what works for Jaelah and what doesn't work for her.
That is absolutely an amazing story. So your family is still being impacted by the situation. One question that comes to mind is, are you considered a fugitive?
Not that I know of. When we first moved here, I got a lot of phone calls from Child Protective Services still. It lasted for about a month and a half. I would receive phone calls from them. Our attorney advised us not to answer it, not to answer phone calls, not to reply to them. They did not have a court order when we left Indiana. They did not have a court order, so our attorney says that we are in the clear.
Thank God for small things.
Yeah.
Well,
if we would have waited, that could have been a completely different situation. It could have been completely different because they showed up at 6 o'clock the day before we left. So if they would have showed up and they would have taken our kids that day, because all they have to say is that they believe our children are in immediate danger. So if they would have showed up at our house and they would have taken our children that night, we would have been stuck. And I mean stuck in pure chaos. I don't know what it would have done to us. I really don't.
I'm sure all of our attendees are probably going to give you a number of questions. And I look forward to following those answers and also following this pending lawsuit. My reach around the country touches many that have been harmed by the system. They have found a successful treatment, and that treatment is considered illegal or harmful many times because of the ignorance of the medical profession, or like Child Protective Services that just doesn't understand how harmful their behavior is on a family unit. And I'm the father of 6 kids, going on 44 years of marriage. And I have worked in the area of children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and some of the challenges that those parents have had to go through with just dealing with something that is that has some valid therapies, but cannabis has also made a huge difference in many of those. So
absolutely.
Do you have anything further to share with our audience?
A lot of people ask how hard it is to move. That's a question that I get asked the most. How everybody makes it seem like it's so easy. Like they're like, just pick up and move if you're in a legal state. And if it's illegal, just pick up and move, go to a legal state. It's not easy. It's not simple. It's not a get in your car and go type of situation. It takes thousands of dollars. It takes planning. It takes so much out of you to move to a legal state. I don't regret it. I don't regret for a second moving to Colorado. It's been amazing for all 4 of the children that are here in Colorado with us. Obviously, the one back in Indiana he doesn't get to see us, and we don't know how that affects him emotionally. He's still too young to really express it too much, or probably to even know how he feels. But and it's not simple, it's not easy. So when you tell someone that is in an illegal state to just pack up and go, you have no idea. We're doing our best, our absolute best.
Have you reached back out to that senator that was supportive initially, that helped take the CPS off of your back initially?
I have. I'm actually working behind the scenes on a couple different laws that I'd like to change. Not only cannabis laws, but for epilepsy. So I'm still in contact with the legislators there. I continue to be involved in the cannabis movement. We have a huge rally going on 420 up at the State House. It's a celebration of people who they still use it in an illegal state, and they're not afraid to hide it, and they're not ashamed of it because it's helping them. So Jaelah's story will be introduced there again. Her grandparents are going to the State House for her that day to be her little guardian angels up there and make sure that they don't forget about her and what they did to her.
Well, our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family in the effort that you're continuing to push on. This is so heart-wrenching to me as a clinician and as a parent, what you've had to go through. And I applaud you, and so does everyone else, for you continuing to move this forward so that other families don't need to go through the trauma that you and your children and husband have had to go through.
I think it was something the agency's overreaching when they had no right to. And my response to that would be that we are absolutely doing what we think is best. What science has proven to us is effective. And if anybody judges or anybody has a problem with it, they can live one day in our life and they'll see what it's like. And it's not easy, and it's not easy to make a decision for your child, but that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Lelah, for sharing your story. And we wish you the best of luck as time moves on and we find out how this engagement with Indiana and CPS moves forward with your lawsuit. Now I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Jill Swing, which is the president and founder of South Carolina's Compassionate Care Alliance. She lives in Charleston, South Carolina, and has 11-year-old twins, Winfield and Mary Louise. What I'd like to ask you first, Jill, is can you tell me how you got into the necessity to use cannabis in a state that it's illegal in?
Sure, absolutely. So, like you said, I have 11-year-old twins, and my daughter, Mary Louise, has severe epilepsy and cerebral palsy. She was diagnosed with, we noticed she was having delays and some unusual head movements at about 8 months. And we were referred by her pediatrician to several specialists, including a neurologist, who then diagnosed her with cerebral palsy, but was unsure about whether she was actually having seizures or not. It took another year to get that diagnosis, and another neurologist, and more testing. And when we found out she was having seizures, she had multiple delays, and I was actually kind of relieved because I thought, okay, this is great. We'll get her on seizure medication, and we'll get the seizures under control, and she'll start progressing and catch up to her brother, hopefully. But that wasn't what happened. And I do feel like this is a story I've heard from parents across the country with children with similar conditions. We tried one medication and then another and multiple combinations of medications. We actually, one of her medications, or a couple of her medications actually made her seizures worse. One of her medications, they decided to just push the dose to the maximum level. And what few little words she was saying and some sign language, all of those skills actually went away. So the traditional, not really traditional, I guess they're not traditional. Traditional is the more plant medicine, I guess, but the current medication, pharmaceutical models were not successful. And we had heard about a little girl in Colorado who had found relief from her seizures using a cannabis oil that was high in CBD and low in THC. And about that time, there were other states that were passing these bills. It was kind of a legislative trend that they were passing these CBD only for epilepsy only bills. And I was fortunate, my mother-in-law had her state senator, they had a mutual friend, and she shared that story. And so they met and introduced the CBD bill in 2014, which we actually got passed. But what that did, although we could legally possess CBD oil in our state, it didn't provide us with any sort of source. So what happened was it just forced moms like me onto the black market in order to obtain medication for our children. And so we were, networking through other parents, through social media, through, a friend's neighbor has a son who lives in Oregon. I mean, we were just reaching out and trying to get anything that we could possibly get our hands on because we were desperate to help our children, and there just wasn't anything else available that was helping. But we were sold things, there wasn't much in the way of testing. So we were sold things we didn't even know if they were fit for human consumption, let alone whether they would have any therapeutic benefits. And we were paying top dollar for these products. And we did find out that we were sold things that had no traceable amounts of CBD in them whatsoever. Or that they were, we got one product that was CBDA instead of CBD, and kids were losing seizure control. And so it was just you finally get what you felt was a safe, reliable source that seemed to have some benefits. And then that person would disappear because, it's illegal. It's illegal for them to ship across state lines. And so, when we got wise after a while, and we were like, okay, we want, labs, we want labeling in labs. And we became more sophisticated consumers, more educated. But even with that, we were sold things that didn't have CBD in them. We were sold things. So even though they had the labeling, it wasn't accurate. And we were fortunate that we had a parent in a legal state who had access to a laboratory that could do this testing for us. So anyway, so with all of that, what I learned very quickly is because of the federal illegality and the challenges of every state, is kind of an island on this issue, that we really needed a comprehensive medical cannabis program within our state that has, cultivation, processing, laboratory testing. And so that is what I started working on back in 2015. Our first comprehensive bill was introduced then. And I was networking with a lot of other parents and a lot of other patients who were, interested and saw the medical benefits and also needed, access to medical cannabis. And what I realized was, we're patients, we're parents, but we're not lobbyists. And so, well, we are whether we choose to be or not. But I guess what I'm saying is that I learned very quickly that most people don't even know who their elected officials are. And, let alone how to get in contact with them. And then once you get in contact with them, what do you say once you are in front of them, and nobody wants to say, well, I'm using this now illegally, that's scary. So that's when I created my organization so that we could provide education for patients and for advocates, and teaching, giving them the tools and the resources that they need to be successful advocates for themselves or their loved ones. So that's how the organization came about. Now, going back directly to your question about the cannabis use, so we did finally get, the Federal Farm Bill of 2014 passed, and slowly but surely, CBD under hemp became more accessible. But what I found was that although there were mild benefits, it wasn't really a home run for my daughter. And, we tried different products. And, again, we're flying blindly. There's no physician guidance on any of this. They don't know anything about dosing. And, it's just this parent network. I mean, we're really, it's online doctoring, I guess. But 2 summers ago, I took my daughter to Maine so that we could actually have access to whole plant medical cannabis treatment under a doctor's care and guidance. They have a guest certification program. You have to jump through a few hoops with their medical marijuana department and your own doctor. But we were up there for a month, and we added THC to my daughter's daily regime. And I will say she was not completely seizure-free, but all of her high-frequency myoclonic seizures, which she'll have, hundreds of those a day, as well as drop seizures, almost completely went away. And the thing that I was so struck by, well, a couple of things. One, she was really stable, and with her CP, she's low tone, so she's super wobbly, and she can't stand independently. She can't really even sit because she just falls over, and she has drop seizures, so it's actually dangerous. And I've got pictures of her sitting independently, and that's something I wouldn't have even anticipated would have happened. So that was exciting. And then she was so much more alert, like she was looking around like she was seeing the world for the first time, and she was babbling, which was something she never really did, even as a baby. So some of the effects and things that I hadn't anticipated, beyond seizure control, were, to me, the most astounding as far as improving her quality of life.
That is just an amazing story. Were you challenged at all during this time by Child Protective Services?
No, fortunately, I haven't had any negative interactions with that. I have I've worked very closely with our lawmakers. I spent a lot of time in Columbia at our state house, and I'm pretty well known and well respected. I have an excellent rapport with our law enforcement folks who are adamantly opposed to legalizing medical cannabis. But to be clear, I haven't done anything illegal within our state. So when I treated her with the THC, that was while we were in Maine. So unfortunately, it wasn't something I could really bring, back to her safely. But we have had parents who have treated their children with CBD in our state who have had their children taken away from them, not understanding legal. They just looked it up and said, "Oh, this is a cannabis plant. This is cannabis. This is marijuana." Even with legal CBD, it has been an issue for some within our state.
Recognizing that THC definitely improved things, when you left after a month and at some point didn't have that product available in her condition, or was that something that hung around following that discontinuance?
When we got home, we did do some adjustments with her pharmaceutical drugs that have been helpful, but the stability is gone. She can barely, she can just really wobbly again. So, and that's something that's really important. I mean, she was doing some walking in with assistance. And losing mobility is just a heartbreaking thing for a parent to have to watch their child go through. And she is in a wheelchair at school, mostly for safety and transport. At home, I can walk her with assistance. I hold her arm, but she cannot walk independently. She can't stand independently. So that was one of the things that is, I feel like, you know, gosh, if we could at least do that, that would be amazing.
I know that there's families out there that defy the system once they see the value of the therapy, whether or not it's legal in their particular area that they live in. Is this something that you're willing to risk in order to improve your child's, you know, long-term success?
Well, let me say this. It's a decision that no parent should ever have to make. And the fact that it's legal in 33 states and it's not legal in South Carolina, just because of my zip code, I can't treat my child with a medication that I know is effective for her, is just wrong. It's just morally wrong. And that's why I'm continuing to change the law. And, you know, that's something that I don't feel comfortable doing, but I do know that parents in our state are having to make those decisions every day. They are having to take those risks. And it's scary. I mean, it's scary. It's a little different, I think, for an adult patient to make that decision for themselves versus when it's a child and you risk losing the child. My child would never survive in foster care. There's just no way. I mean, and so like, I can't risk that because it's really a greater risk than, you know, watching her struggle. Yeah, that's hard. But you know, she's okay. You know, I mean, we have good days and bad days, and we're just making it through the best we can until we have legal access, you know, to medical cannabis.
So this is just heart-wrenching to hear this story. You know, the one from our earlier panelist and now this, it just makes me angry as hell. It's so frustrating, especially for a parent to have to endure this kind of situation when you know that there's something that would make the quality of life of your child better without harming your child, which is one of the reasons why cannabis is such a valuable therapeutic tool. It's a adaptogenic herb. It helps allow the body to arrive at homeostasis. It has a broad therapeutic index. There isn't any real toxicities that stay around once a dose that may be too high for that individual or causes another adverse event from consuming that particular dose or ratio of cannabinoids or route of administration could cause. Once you remove the exposure, there is no long-term sequelae, no long-term damage ever. So audience, is there anything that we can do to help you in your effort to make a change in South Carolina?
Every state is an island, like I said earlier. I just returned from ASA Unity Conference, Americans for Safe Access. I just got back from DC late last night and was reminded that, you know, the push just cannot continue to be on the state level, that we really need to fight on the federal level. You know, things are happening with the UN. They just met this week in Austria. And that is going to be, marijuana is going to be rescheduled. Unfortunately, because of the timing and the way their procedure work, it was going to happen next year at their conference. So that's in the pipeline. I mean, that gives the opportunity for the United States to re-examine the scheduling of cannabis. But, you know, we've got to have change on the federal level for some of these last lagging states like South Carolina, who, you know, we've got lawmakers who don't want to create a state law that directly opposes federal law. You know, that's one of the hangups. And then, you know, I want to remind people who are in legal states. I mean, some of these legal states have been up and going for a really long time. And I think, you know, I have these conversations on social media, and they forget, you know, they're so used to it. It's just a way of life for them. And they forget that there are people out there who still don't have access to this medication. And I think it's hard for them to relate. So I just want to remind people out there that, you know, there are those of us who are, you know, who are back home still fighting the good fight, and, you know, just love and support. You know, sometimes that goes a long way for us mamas that are still hanging on and still fighting.
Well, I hope that our audience can do something out there in order to help further this wonderful cause that you've taken on to take care of your family and help so many others. I'd like to thank our panelists for their informative answers, and thank you to our wonderful audience today for your thought-provoking questions. You may continue to submit questions, and our speakers will follow up via email. That's all for now. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.